Good morning, guys, on this thankful Thursday. How you guys doing? It's a blessed day. I'm gonna take my glasses off so you can see me. Hey, how you doing? How you doing? How you doing? Got my hat on today. Feeling kind of bebopish, you know. Got my heart on the side. See, hey, we're getting ready to start with everything happens for a reason. We're gonna go over last Thursday's review on a few things. We'll go back to the last one. Does anyone have any fortune cookies? When we were talking about Steve that felt that he wasted his life. Let's go over some things that was mentioned in Steve's story when it came to the fortune cookie. Let's see what we can go over about this fortune cookie that it says, does anyone have any fortune cookies? Steven, his name was Steve. Okay, he felt that, and now I have to come to terms with the fact that I've wasted my youth. Sometimes we feel like we wasted our time on doing things. Let me move this over a little bit. Sorry, wasted time, just wasted time. That's his catastrophe. Now I have to move on, but I can't because it doesn't make any sense. It's too big of a mistake to ignore. It just has to make some sense when we waste time. There's got to be a reason in terms of something I've learned, maybe, or something I just got that I wouldn't have gotten any other way. Because the only reason I have now is a bad one. And that there's something wrong with me. This is what Steve said to himself. And I can't live with that. I mean, it's like I can't go on thinking that I'm the kind of guy who throw his whole youth away without building anything. Some of us waste time on things that we know that we think is going to amount to something, but it just doesn't. We can waste time in relationships, waste time in marriage, waste time in certain jobs. So what does it mean? Do you have any fortune cookies? Steve answered the 4 diagnostic questions I just gave you. He came up with 4 strong yeses. Let's go back to the diagnostic questions. The questions was, is it hard for you to trust yourself to deal with new situations? Think about a couple of things you've done in your life that you regret. Was the main reason you did those things because you were acting out of fear? When you make a decision, is fear an important factor that you weigh and balance? Would you say that your life is filled with things you're scared of? That's what we're talking about, partial of a life without fear. Those are the questions that Steve answered. I just gave you. He came up with 4 strong yeses. I told him that the meaning of what happened to him was getting what he needed to let go of his fear. We got to let go of our fears, guys. Steve got lost in the thought. Finally, he said, I don't know. There were so many parts of life that I thought were stupid. They made me very angry. Very angry. I was going to stay above it all, write a brilliant novel. Okay, this isn't working. And you move on to something else. We always start something, but we never finish it. We move on to this, we move on to that, we move on to this, we move on to that. Yeah. We've had that happen where we just, well, we're going to start painting the house, dear. Hell no, we need to remodel the bathroom, and we move on. Hold on. Are you done? Okay. Okay, I was talking to my granddaughter. Excuse me, guys. Um, but I didn't move on. And after those first couple of years, I think I knew that this reason I was continuing to waste my time was because I really was afraid of life. Are you afraid of life? Some of us are afraid of life. So I was afraid I wasn't good enough. I was afraid I would just break apart in the face of difficulties of life and show myself to be a very small, mediocre person. So you're right, Myra. I think I'm afraid of everything. Now, this was a story about Steve. But how can overcoming my fears be the reason why I wasted so many years of my life? I asked Steve to tell me something specific he'd been afraid of. Well, I was afraid of going to work for some big corporation. Okay, what were you afraid of would happen there? I just, not do well, not fit in, not be happy. It would be a disaster. There was a note of false bravado in his voice as he answered my questions as if he were laughing off a catastrophe that really terrified him. And then what? Eventually, they fired me, I guess. And what would happen then? Well, it would have all been such a waste. I felt terrible. I paused. Isn't that where you are now? I said, almost in a whisper. Steve looked at me with incredible feeling in his eyes. It's exactly where I am now, he said in a low, husky voice, his bravado crumbling. That was the point, I said softly. Everything you were afraid of has already happened. There's nothing more to be afraid of. So you're saying that the reason I wasted my life so far anyway was to see that I didn't have to be afraid of wasting my life? Isn't that what makes us scared of anything? I said. You were scared? Now it happened. Now you see that you can cope. I mean, I see you standing here. You don't look like a basket case, and you're not alone in your situation. Lots of people can't move forward in life until the thing they're most afraid of happens to them and liberates them from their fears. Steve got up from the chair he had been sitting in. He started pacing around the room the way people sometimes do when they have something big to chew on. Hold on, guys. All right. Something to chew on. I could tell he was on the verge of saying something. Then he came over to the chair, put his hand on the back of it, and leaned forward. Let me tell you about my father. He was one of those Korean War guys. When he got out, he worked as a technician in the defense industry. Companies would keep losing a contract, and my dad would keep getting laid off. As he got older, his skills got old. It was harder and harder for him to get a job. He worked incredibly hard, but instead of getting ahead, he always kept falling behind. It broke his spirit. My father's life scared the crap out of me. You really can waste an entire life. And to do that working at a job you really don't care about, how could I not be afraid? Steve sighed. You're right. My fear was controlling my life, and I didn't even know it. I had to live my fear to loosen the grip it had on me. Moving forward with courage, section 5. Steve had figured out how cosmic kindergarten works. We go through something tough, and then we see what a gift it was because it made our fears irrelevant. But you can't stop there. The bigger the event, the bigger the gift. The bigger the gift, the more of a difference it has to make. I know you still feel the same. But because of what happened to you, you have already conquered your fear. In a way, you've been given exactly what you need to conquer your fear. You have to trust that. Even though you may still feel the same old fears, you have to live as if those fears were now dead and gone. You've been given a gift that makes it possible to live without fear. Wow. So, what would you do if you really felt no fear? This question is the key to figuring out how to use what you've learned. There are some way fear kept out of your life. There's some way fear kept you out of life. Seeing that you don't have to be afraid anymore gets you back into life. Whatever you do, it has to be something you couldn't allow yourself to do when you were afraid. Maybe you need to add something to your life or let something go from your life or do what you've been doing, but in a different way. When you make some change in your life because you believe you've been given the gift of letting go of fear, you'll really understand the meaning of what you went through. Section 6. And the opposite of fear is, wonder what it is. Once you see the reason something happened was so you could let go of fear, fear becomes different in your life. You realize it's more of a habit than a truth about the world, but it's a sticky habit. So, how do you get out of the fear habit once you realize you no longer need it? What you need is a better story about yourself. Your old story had to do with how afraid you were. Your new story will have to do with how resilient you are. One woman I interviewed was caught in college dorm fire in the middle of the night. It was terrifying. She managed to wake up her friends and get all of them out. However, she suffered serious smoke inhalations in the process. Suppose this happened to you. Look, look at it from the point of view of the old fear habit. This event shows how things can go wrong and you can get hurt. The light goes on when you see a completely different image of yourself. And the same experience, out the bathroom, young lady. Something bad happened and you survived. More. You came through like a champ, although it was very hard at the time. Trinity, come out of the bathroom, please. You need to come out, sweetie. Excuse me. She's in the bathroom. That's why I hear water running. When the people see that the meaning, let me go back. Something bad happened and you survived more. You came through like a champ, although it was very hard at that time. Now it's a story of resilience. When people see that the meaning to be afraid, they switch from seeing themselves as scaredy cats to seeing themselves as resilient, less like victims, more like heroes. Look back on some time in your life when you felt a lot of fear. Now tell yourself the story of what you went through, but this time make it a story about your resilience. It is important to see that resilience doesn't stop with survival. It can take a person farther than he or she ever dreamed. Possibly. 28-year-old Artie was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. He came to me terrified on what the future held and hunger to know why this had happened to me. His answer to the diagnostic questions on page 92 and 93 showed clearly that the reason this happened was to help him to let go of fear, which had been an issue in his life before he got sick. I asked, what would you do if you weren't afraid of the future? Action speaks louder than words. He'd never been particularly active before, but he started a program running. At first, action speaks louder than words. You got to put stuff to action, guys. Don't talk about it, just be about it. He'd never been particularly active before, but he started a program of running. At first, this was primarily to maintain his muscle tone. But soon, he decided that there was more here for him than this. He began running longer distance more often and faster. Eventually, he started running 10Ks and marathons. He took a survival reaction to a whole other level. He was inspired to add a new dimension to his life. His sense of himself as a physical being actually grew in spite of his disease. He no longer had to be afraid, not only because he survived, but because he found a way to thrive more than he'd ever imagined. Of course, we all die in the end. So are you going to wait until you're very old and as you slip through the portals of death, see that death itself is nothing to dread, and then realize what a waste of your lifetime of fear was? You don't need to. For you, the catastrophe has already happened. We all get to the point where we see that fear does nothing more than add an unnecessary element of pain to the process of living. We understand that the terrorists win if we live with the fear they're trying to stir up. Well, we become terrorists to ourselves when we allow ourselves to be controlled by our own fears. Don't let your fears control you. Now, we'll be going into section 7. But isn't fear your friend? That's that. Someone would ask, what's so terrible about fear? It means it's natural. Isn't fear a signal that you need to be careful? What that thing they say about old, bold soldiers? There are old, bold soldiers and there are bold soldiers. But there are no old, bold soldiers. Isn't that true? One of fear's oldest arguments is I'll keep you safe. You've been gotten a gift to help you let go of fear. All righty. You know that because of your answers to the diagnostic questions in this chapter, that gift was the meaning of what happened to you. Something that's made it possible for you to find your courage. If you want to make use of this gift, you have to understand that I'll keep you safe is one of the fear's greatest lies. Fear doesn't keep you safe. Prudence keeps you safe. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak faced this issue head on. He had been the leader of an elite commando unit that faced the riskiest, most difficult assignments. He found that you cannot live a life like that with fear. The stresses would kill you. Yet you think that without fear, your recklessness would kill you. So how do you survive? Barak said, the ability to survive in a commando unit is based on very carefully planning and very careful behavior. When you're walking very close to the edge of a cliff, you have to behave in a very risk adversary way. I told my people we are not adventurous. So you can walk very close to the edge of the cliff if you make sure that every step is stable. You all right back there? Okay. I check on. Before it was your panicky heart that keeps you from danger, but it also gave you the limited life filled with pain. Now it's your cool head that will keep you from danger, even without fear. You don't want to fall off a cliff. So think about what you're doing. Your mindfulness will keep you safe. In any case, fear never really helps. Think about the fear we sometimes bring to relationships, how it makes us clutches, withdraw, lash out. Then we always create this very thing we were afraid of. This happens everywhere fear operates. What is it? What is it like to live without fear? Here's what two people said would have who faced the worst kind of danger. Breadwiners and the gargoyles over Manhattan said, all experienced climbers know about this. The more you grip, the sooner you tire, and the more you're prone you are to falling. It says, all experienced climbers know about this. The more you grip, the sooner you tire, the more prone you are to falling. Peter Matchison put it more poetically in The Snow Leopard. And of course, it is this clinging, the tightness of the panic that gets people killed, to clutch in the ancient Egyptians, to clutch the mountains in the Assyrian were euphemisms that signified to die. Barak reminds us that it's all about being careful, not about being afraid. Whiners and Murchisons reminds us that being careful must go hand in hand with a certain relaxed attitude. Careful, but not clutching. That's what people who face the worst kind of danger can teach us about living without fear. As you accept the gift of courage and think about what it means for you, remember that you can be careful without clutching and you'll be fine. Last section, section 8. Death to a bad habit. Fear is a special issue. It's not only true that showing us a way to end fear is one of the 10 reasons why things happen, but all 10 of the reasons that things happen work in one way or another to end our fear. Fear of not being loved, fear of not being strong, fear of not being happy, and so on. So it's important to make sure that we do everything possible to get what we need to end our fear. At one point in our work together, one of my patients said something very smart. It's been blowing my mind thinking that the reason I've lived through what I did is so I could face my worst fear and give myself what I needed to move on. My question is, fear has been a habit for me. What do I do if fear creeps back in? That's the question. Let's see what the answer is. Fear is a habit. What people don't realize that it's one of the more curable habits. Think of it like this. When we get scared, we have thoughts that blow up a balloon of fear. I'm going to die. Everything's ruined forever now. They will think I'm ridiculous now. People who cope well with fear have counter thoughts that puncture holes into the balloon in this balloon until they all their fear leaks out. How do you do that? You use the patent Kirschbaum 7-step method for overcoming fear. All that requires is that you ask yourself 7 questions. Why am I afraid? Question number 1. This is not a stupid question. Sometimes we know, but lots of times we don't. In your battle with fear, you have to understand something. Fear tries to make itself as vague as possible. That's how it gains power over you. Let's say you're starting a new relationship. Fear wants you to be afraid it won't work out. Then your head fills with nameless phantoms and fear wins. You win. Hold on, guys. Like I said, you start, then your head fills with nameless phantoms and fear wins. You win when you get really specific. Exactly how and why wouldn't it work out? Because you're not right for each other. Okay. Give your relationship enough time to see if you're right for each other. Then you win because the more specific of fear it is, the more easily it can be conquered because it's smaller. It's not bigger, it's smaller. Number 2, what's the worst that could happen? Many times we're afraid because we panic ourselves unnecessarily. There's simply no point in being afraid once you've looked into the worst that can happen. Isn't really something so terrible. Lots of people are terrified of speaking in public, for example. Well, suppose you have to speak at the next meeting at your school's PTA. What's the worst that can happen? You won't make such a great speech. You'll hesitate, lose your place, have to be asked to speak more loudly, or so what? The worst thing that happened was that as an amateur speaker, you came across like an amateur. So what? You don't speak in public for a living. You're just a parent. Number 3, how likely is it? Many of us, when we fly, are afraid of a plane crashing, for example. Yeah, me. I ain't been on a plane. But how likely is it? It turns out that it's very unlikely. There are 5,000 flights a day in the United States alone. Many of these things we're afraid of lose their power to scare us. When we realize how unlikely they are to happen, people who are good at dealing with fear have the habit of asking the question, asking the question, how likely is this to happen? And then coming up with the realistic answer, usually pretty darn unlikely, and then getting comfort from the answer. I will continue next week, guys. Remember to smile today, study with excitement, meditate with intentions, inspire others, laugh hysterically, and elevate yourself. The 3 E's: your energy, your effort, and your excitement. We'll finish section 8, final chapter, in the part of death to a bad habit. Into everything happens for a reason. Peace. Hold on. I forgot my glasses.